library copy of There's a Boy in the Girl's Bathroom by one of his favorite authors, Louis Sachar. Efren loved reading books, even when he'd read them before. It was like visiting an old friend. The main character, Bradley Chalkers, was the best. And it wasn't just that he had a really sweet side to him that his classmates didn't get to see. Nope. The boy was super tough, and no matter how rough things got for him, he continued to show up and fight. Like Efren's best friend, David, another misunderstood kid. Some kids at school only saw this white kid who likes to dress flashy and flaunt his latest piece of jewelry. But Efren knew the real David, the same boy who once took off the sweatshirt he was wearing and donated it for a clothing drive in the neighborhood. Normally, Efren would lie in the tub reading and laughing until a stampede of feet came running toward the door. But this morning, his eyelids were extra heavy, and the need for sleep was too powerful. He couldn't fight it, not after staying up so late waiting for Amá to return from working overtime hours at the factory. For the last couple of weeks, there'd been a whole lot of talk, a whole lot of chisme, especially around the laundromat, about various raids and stop points happening around town. Efren tried not thinking about what he'd seen on the news, all the stories about families being separated, kids put in cages. But that was easier said than done. Efren couldn't help but worry. Despite numerous lectures from Amá and repeated threats of being on the receiving end of her chancla, he stayed up really late until she got home. He'd done the best he could to piece together the information he heard, but it wasn't easy. It seemed like any time he caught adults talking about it, someone in the room would nod toward him, and the topic would shift to something else, usually the final minutes of the previous night's telenovela. After an unplanned nap in the tub, Efren heard rattling in the kitchen and headed over. By the stove stood Amá, wearing her fuzzy blue robe that, according to Max, made her look like the Cookie Monster. Efren stood and admired how easily Amá formed perfect little saucers from the dough masa de maíz, and then pinched the steaming edges to form a tiny wall to keep the beans from seeping off. Her hands were tough and hummingbird fast as she tested the griddle's temperature by touching it with her bare fingers. How did she manage not to burn herself? Efren wondered. Amá's sopes were delicious, and even though they weren't much more than a thick corn tortilla topped with beans and fresh ranchero cheese, Efren didn't think of them as a poor person's meal. To him, to Max, to Mía, they were a special treat. Just one of the many milagros Amá performed on a daily basis. Something super. Super sopes. Sopers. That made Amá Soperwoman. Efren laughed to himself. The word fit her perfectly. Before long, Max and Mía were up and climbed onto their usual seats at the table. Sopes! They turned to each other and sprang out into song. Frijoles, frijoles, de las comidas más ricas, lo más que comes, lo más que pitas. Efren shook his head. You guys should be practicing your English. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. O'Neill, used to say that's the only way to master the language. Aquí están. Amá set the breakfast spread on the kitchen table, her exhausted eyes creasing as she smiled. Mijo, most of the world speaks more than one language, and Spanish is a part of who we are. She moved toward Efren and ruffled his hair. You'll understand when you're older. Max and Mía reached in first, each picking up a bean and cheese top sope. Efren eyed the last one, while Amá filled the glasses with chilled orange juice. Amá, where's yours? Ay, amor, a cup of cafecito is all I need. Efren's stomach grumbled, but it was his heart giving the orders. Amá, why don't you take mine? I can have breakfast at school anyway. There's no point letting all that school food go to waste. And have them think I can't provide for my own children? No gracias. Efren inhaled. Ay, Amá, he said, knowing that she was simply being, well, Amá. She pulled out a nopal she'd cut yesterday from the cactus plant, peeking over the neighboring fence, and matter-of-factly scraped off the thorns with a knife. Then she'd held it over the stovetop barehanded. When it was well roasted, she scooped up the remainder of the beans with a wooden spoon and created a sort of cactus taco. See? I'm fine, she said, taking a bite. Being Soperwoman wasn't just about checking teeth, flattening down cowlicks, and making sure Max wore only one pair of underwear at a time. It included making sure that everyone wore perfectly creased pants and that any holes...